So I really only have one more question here. So for many of us, including me, we've been revising and revising and working on a novel that we really want to see published, but we're not submitting it because we keep thinking it's not quite ready. I know I've gone through cycles of that. And do you ever like self-impose a deadline and say, "All right, forget it, that's it. Like after this year, if I'm still revising it, I'm gonna self-publish it. Like that's it. It has to be done." Do you ever just kind of get hardcore with yourself? Um, so Autumn, I mean,
Well, I mean, what I did with Outleaf, my first novel, I got to a point where I was like, okay, this is the best that I can get it right now. And I was honest with that myself. I'm like, there's no way that rewriting it again is going to make it any better at this point. So I decided to move on. And I have not trunked it in the sense that I'm never going to come back to it, but I realized that I needed to grow as a writer before I did it. So I have just put it on the back burner, kind of, and it's going to stay there for a little while until I can learn a little bit more about the craft. And then, yes, come back to it. And then put my new knowledge in place, and then, yes, market it. So I'm just not there yet. It's kind of ultimately where it is at for me.
it's like, do you have, by the time I'm 40, that thing better be done.
Oh, that kind of, yeah, actually, no, I haven't gone that far. However, because it is science fantasy, and more on the science fiction realm rather than the fantasy realm, I have decided that I'm going to have probably two diverging streams. One is going to be rewritten fairy tales and a mishmash of legends and gods and goddesses and Earth history kind of mashed together. And then my other stream is going to be these alien worlds with colonists and very science fact and very ecosystem oriented and life cycle oriented and that kind of, alien stuff that I really, really love. So those are different enough. I'm probably going to have either two publishing names or two versions of my name when I publish. So for me, it's kind of like, which branch do I want to start with? And I've decided that I want to start with a fantasy because they're more series oriented, at least in my case. I can pick another series of 4 or 5 fairy tales to mash up into a second book that would be in the same universe, and I can keep going with that for a while. Versus these science fantasy ones, which are their own unique worlds, and I've got 3 or 4 different ones that I could work on, but each one's completely different from itself, and they're all standalone. So I feel like for building career and name recognition, it's smarter to focus on the fantasy series because those sell better, and people like series better than standalone. So I figured I'd start with that and kind of cut my teeth with that. But my absolute passion is probably for the science fantasy ones. So heading back in that direction at some point is definitely on my menu. So, I mean, honestly, I'm just making a goal as I say this, but I probably should make a goal. I really probably should. And yeah, let's say in 2 years, I might switch streams a little bit, unless the fantasy one is going really well and I need to keep going on that for a deadline purpose. But yeah, if I haven't, if the fantasy side hasn't taken off in 2 years, I'll switch back to Outleaf.
Yeah, well, I keep hoping science fantasy as a genre will take off a little bit. I think it's high time. So maybe I'll
It
have you
just
on the show for a future episode. Yeah, you also agree, right?
Science fantasy just needs one big book to push it, and then all of a sudden it'll be like a genre again.
Yeah, yeah, I hope so. So yeah, I agree. I've always my next few novels after my series is finished will be fantasy because, like you said, they do sell better. But yeah, my series right now is science fantasy, and that's my big passion. And I still think like I feel like this is something, and I would like to see it. So, Sherry, like you probably haven't been revising and revising some work, but you might have. Have you done that before?
I did actually. My first novel I worked on for about 10 years. But actually, a different kind of deadline that I set for myself was, well, actually, my friend Adria Laycraft, who also attended Odyssey, but in 2006, so the year after me, she was at my place for our local convention, KeyCon, and she was working on editing a novel that she'd been revising and revising and revising. And I was stuck. I'd written like a few thousand words of a new novel, and just was not, I was procrastinating, like I hadn't written on it in weeks, and we made an agreement because I was going to her convention in Calgary at the end of August that year, so we had like, I don't know, what, 4 months? And so we made an agreement that if I finished my first draft and she finished editing her novel, by the time that convention came around, then we would get ourselves a hotel. Like it was a win-win situation for me, because either way, I was staying at her house or we were going to stay at a hotel. For the convention, if we had a hotel, it was going to be right across the street, really convenient and kind of a luxury that neither of us would normally do for ourselves. And it was interesting because even though I wanted to procrastinate, I'm like, doesn't matter to me if I get a hotel or not. I didn't want to let her down, and she didn't want to let me down. And so we were really accountable to each other. And I finished the first draft of that novel, I think 2 days before I went to Calgary. She finished editing just before she got in the car to pick me up. She was a few minutes late, but she finished, so we got to stay in a hotel that weekend. And it was the best deadline we could have ever done, because I would have had no problem letting myself down, but I didn't want to let her down. And it was the same for her. So it was great to have that kind of accountability partner.
Yeah, that makes sense. There's nothing like
We've never been able to figure out a kind of a reward after that, though, because nothing compared.
Right. Yeah. I kind of have been using, like right now, HarperCollins has an open call for submission.
Yes.
Like starting in October. So I'm like, well, that's a good deadline. I guess I'll work to that one. I guess I just kind of, I've done this before. I've gone through cycles where I've been revising this one book over and over again. And I'll aim for, like, if a publisher has an open call, I'll try to aim for that deadline.
Do you ever get to go to conferences where they have pitch sessions?
I did that once, and I pitched. That's where I got the editor at Tor Books to read.
Yeah. When I was at Seton Hill, I was starting my second year, so I was a third termer. And Don Moss was going to be the guest speaker that week. And they and normally for pitch sessions, they usually do the fives, which are the people who are graduating. And then if they have room, they'll do the fours, who are halfway through their second year. But instead of saying that, the email went out saying that Don Moss would be doing it, the fives had to do it, and any senior student who had a completed manuscript. I had 3 months, and damn it, I was going to finish that manuscript, because I was going to have a chance to pitch to Don Moss. I was the only 3 who pitched Don Moss. I mean, and most of those pitch sessions, they say, sure, send it to me, and then, a few months later, get your token rejection. But it was the first time I'd ever pitched to anybody. It was a great experience trying to write up that query paragraph and that kind of stuff, which was a great deadline to work to. There's no way that novel was ready to be pitched to anybody. It was not ready to be seen by anybody, but it was a great experience. And I totally knew that it wasn't going to be ready.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think I did the same thing for that pitch session. It was at the World Horror Convention last year.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was like, oh, major tour editor going to be there. I guess I better have a novel that I can be proud of. I already had it completed, but I was like, that beginning just never works. I have to try it again. And then, of course, I practiced the pitch, and I did a good job. I actually got her to read it, or at least try the first chapter, so the pitch worked. The first chapter didn't.
Brian, what about you?
I self-impose deadlines all the time, and I have given up beating myself up for when I don't meet them. But I think those deadlines are important for us as writers, to actually get stuff done, so we're not languishing on a manuscript for forever and forever and forever. But again, I think it's important to have a target completion date and a target date for when you're going to send things out into the world. But on the other hand, also just be nice to yourself and not beat yourself up mentally or emotionally when you don't meet them.